unemployment was hovering around 15 to 20%. But Americans stuck in this economic bracket would be eligible to work in the construction, conservation, caregiving, restoration, and adaptation trades that are essential to a safe, zero-emissions economy. Indeed, the national project of decarbonization could be precisely the historical event that repairs the income inequality and the social fracturing of the neoliberal era. Still, if you talk about decarbonization in this way, as an economic benefit, a windfall to the 99 or at least the 90th percent that can be easily gained with like minimal capital investment, you will surely be asked, well, where do we get the money to make these investments? Scholars give a variety of answers to this question. If you're a modern monetary theory economist, you will say they can be paid for by procurement, whereby the Fed can just print the money for all of this, print whatever money Congress allocates. And this is not going to create inflation in this case because there are going to be so many new goods and services that all of this liquidity is going to be mopped up in the creation of new industries and in all of these new consumer goods. So we're not actually going to have rising prices because all the money is immediately going to go into a decarbonized economy. Now, if you're more conservative but still progressive, like say Paul Krugman, you don't think MMT works in the context of global exchange, fine. But then you're still hawkish about borrowing the money to make these changes because decarbonizing is such an economic benefit that the loan will pay for itself. It's just part of the investment. Or if you're more centrist and you like a pay-as-you-go kind of thing, one thing you could do perhaps is raise taxes on the super rich. Any of these methods would effectively socialize decarbonization investments so that the vast majority of individual consumers wouldn't really feel them. If you think about how much money the federal government spent to stabilize the financial system in 2007, 2008, just tremendous amounts of money, $70 billion or something like that. I'm perhaps getting this wrong. I challenge any of us to say exactly how much of that came out of our own pockets in particular. So the question to ask then is not how much will decarbonization cost, or even how will we pay for it, but who stands to benefit? I have been arguing that most Americans will benefit, will come out better off once we've decarbonized. But it also remains the case that fossil fuel interests and the 1% and their political allies stand to lose a great deal of money. Scientists have calculated that to meet even a 2 degrees Celsius target, a third of oil reserves, half of gas reserves or methane reserves, and over 80% of current coal reserves must remain unused. This unburnable carbon and the infrastructure of its production is currently included in fossil fuel companies' listed equity, which are valuations, of course, that do not reflect the reality of the climate crisis. For this reason, decarbonization will be a political struggle. And it will be very challenging to establish that we are going to manage the decline of the fossil fuel industry and negotiate with the petrostates to update their economies so as to have a global net zero system. One thing that will help is Congress needs to stop artificially inflating the value of oil and gas companies with subsidies, and they need to legislate climate risk disclosure in order to encourage the private sector to reallocate capital to companies planning to create value from the zero emissions systemic revolution. Happily, one recent development has made the challenge easier. And I know this is going to sound kind of amazing or implausible considering the level of profit that the fossil fuel companies have been showing since Putin invaded Ukraine. But The fossil fuel industry is actually no longer a pillar of the American economy. Due to automation and consolidation, fossil fuel companies are shedding jobs. Only about 500,000 people now work in mining and oil and gas extraction, compared to the 1.7 million people who work in, say, real estate, which is a sector directly threatened by climate change. The oil and gas worker is fast becoming a mythical figure in American culture, akin to the cowboys in 1950s film and television, representing a nostalgic invocation of a past expansion of American imperial power. Instead, today, the fastest growing job in America is solar installer. And miners and oil and gas workers know this themselves. During Biden's first term, the United Mine Workers of America, America's largest coal union, announced that it would accept a transition away from fossil fuels in exchange for new jobs and renewable energy. Its proposed transition plan asked the federal government to encourage safe energy development in former coal country, retrain miners to work in safe energy industries, guarantee their wages, health insurance, and pensions, and support their families in other ways during the transition. Now, this is exactly the kind of systemic approach to climate policy set out by the Green New Deal and a multiracial working class movement allied with tech investors and entrepreneurs and suburban and urban concerned and alarmed people can build a coalition pressing for this kind of systemic transformation. The systemic approach of the Green New Deal, centered on public investment that makes people's lives better immediately, will not only create new industries and new jobs, but will also ensure that no worker gets left behind in the safe energy revolution. It will ensure that we move to decarbonize our economy at the scale and speed required to halt global heating well below 2 degrees Celsius. It will make the majority of Americans healthier and wealthier, more prosperous, more able to devote their resources and their energy to their children's futures. Fossil fuel interests and rich people are trying to block decarbonization and to prevent the federal government from making these investments. That is why, insofar as they support climate policy as a greenwash in order to extend their license to operate, oil and gas companies and Republicans and other fossil fuel interests support policies that impose costs directly on workers and consumers, such as a carbon tax in exchange for negating any other regulations. And they highlight the putative costs of climate policy at every turn. But climate communicators, all of us in this room, anyone who's watching this on YouTube, can neutralize this strategy by emphasizing instead the costs of climate damages, which are real and unavoidable unless we phase out fossil fuels. Use powerful and effective narratives already emerging all around us of Americans whose homes and businesses and health have been destroyed already by the harms of the climate crisis at only 1.2 degrees Celsius of heating. Then, once you've painted that picture for people, in contrast to both fossil fuel interests and neoliberal economists, we can stand on ever-growing heaps of economic evidence to say that decarbonization is a benefit, indeed a windfall, that will put money directly into most Americans' pockets, and that the investments the United States needs to make to decarbonize its systems will be distributed socially. They will not be felt in that wallet. Talking about the economic dimension of the climate crisis in this way is not only accurate and justified, it's also politically efficacious. Calling decarbonization a benefit both exposes and neutralizes the fantasy maintained by tendentious economic modeling that just growing our GDP will save us from climate devastation. And I think it introduces something new and really important into the language of climate politics, an understanding that an economic system which takes ecological considerations into account can actually increase human flourishing. Thank you for listening.
Well, I think you were preaching to the choir, but nevertheless, we have about 10 minutes for Q&A, for comments, questions. That was amazing. It's a lot to process and a lot to think about. But Lisa.
Well, I have a question. Just went back historically during the Obama administration, there was a social cost of carbon, which President Trump then reduced to $1. So if you could connect the issue, because you said Democrats and Republicans alike, so just challenging that.
Yeah.
The policies on the cost of climate impacts.
Well, Obama's SCC, social cost of carbon, was woefully inadequate. It was essentially in line with Nordhaus's optimal target. I think it was like $45 or something like that. Recent calculations have set the social cost of carbon at over $1,000 a ton. So if you compare those calculations to Obama's $45 per ton, I would characterize Obama's understanding of the climate crisis as indelibly influenced by Nordhausian economics, so that he acknowledged it was real, but didn't actually see the absolute urgency of phasing out fossil fuels, and so he priced carbon low, expecting that it would rise, that price would rise over time, but didn't see that there was actually, even just under the precautionary principle, another way to do it, which is to price everything really high while we're in danger and nothing is working properly for decarbonization. And then as the danger lessens and there's less carbon in our economy and fewer fossil fuels, then you can actually start lowering the price, because the challenge is less. So yes, I also have other issues with Obama. When he came back from the Copenhagen climate conference, he lifted the ban on fossil fuel exports, and it made America the biggest fossil fuel exporter in the world. And under UNFCCC, United Nations Climate Change Convention rules, national emissions accounting takes place under the aegis of nations, and emissions are attributed to the place where they're emitted, or the carbon is emitted, or where the fossil fuel is used. But a lot of this fossil fuel is coming from the United States, because we're actually now, thanks to Obama, the biggest exporter of fossil fuel in the world. So, and then I also talk about in the India and China conference how he undermined the UNFCCC. You've helped me now open my heart about all of my heartbreak over Obama.
Can of worms, Lisa.
Yeah, you opened the can of worms. But I think it's really important to see how complicated his climate record is, because to me, I feel like this is almost the most important reason why our climate politics is so stuck, because the people that we imagine are on our side are actually advancing the development of fossil fuels and not not trying explicitly to phase them out. So once we frame the task as the need to get fossil fuels out of the system, then it becomes less a partisan issue and more sort of like, are you for fossil fuel phase out or are you not? And when you ask the question in that way, unfortunately, it becomes clear that many Democrats have a kind of all of the above energy strategy, which isn't really working. So that's my answer to that question.
Yeah.
Danny.
So